Okay, comrades, I would like to welcome you all to another meeting of the Workers' International Network. This week, we're very proud to host a meeting which will be opened up by Federico Moreno, who is a comrade from Argentina, a member of the International Socialist League, which is part of the Workers' Left Front. Argentina is, as we discovered in at a recent meeting that we held on the question, it's one of the few, if only, countries where Trotskyism has, you could say, a mass base, where the left is there are several left groups which are which make up, I think, the only Trotskyist groups make up really the majority, or maybe all of the left in Argentina. Of course, Argentina's had a particularly checkered history, going through a kind of populist Bonapartist regime under Peron, and a number of very shaky bourgeois governments, and a whole period when the main challenge to the ruling elite was from a guerrillarist organization, and of course the horrible, brutal dictatorship that followed that. It also had the war with Britain over the Falklands or the Malvinas, and we also have this extremely uh, reactionary, brutal regime of uh, uh, really. Sorry, one second, I'll just mute.
Hi, hi, comrade.
Uh, Thanks, comrades. And we also have this Milei regime, which is really a kind of prototype for the Trump regime. So it'll be particularly interesting to hear from Federico about the successes of Trotskyism and of his group, and the prospects and the perspectives. We did hear only a few weeks ago from Comrade Norma, and I think we should pay her a particular tribute for coming today, because she's, I think I'm right in saying, just stepped off the plane from Argentina to France. And so I would particularly, thank you so much for overcoming the fatigue to come and participate. We're also hoping that Comrade Eric will be coming. Eric is somebody an American comrade who visited Argentina not so long ago. I believe he actually met with Federico when he was there, but he came back full of absolutely elation at the fact that everybody in of the high political level of the people he spoke to in Argentina, and the understanding of Trotskyism that exists in that country. So I think it'll be particularly interesting and instructive to hear from Comrade Federico now, and I hand over to him. If you open up for 25 minutes, and then we'll throw it open for questions and discussion. Thanks, comrades.
Hi guys, hey Roger. Well, thanks for the invitation in the first place. It's always good. The exchange is always good. I guess what I'm going to try to do in 25 minutes is some explanation of Milei and some explanation of why Trotskyism has what it has in Argentina, as well as its limitations and challenges, because it's also not all roses, obviously. But it is kind of the two extremes of the situation in Argentina. How do you have in the same country a revolutionary left, better off than many other places, and one of the most extreme expressions of the phenomenon of the rise of the far right internationally. I mean, briefly, just as an overview, if you look at Milei has to be understood through two things essentially. One, the kind of global context of polarization of the rise of the far right wouldn't exist if it wasn't a part of that global phenomenon. And in Argentina, this has specifically to do with the crisis of Peronism and the failure of the progressive cycle, the kind of Bolivarianism regionally, if you want to call it the pink tide, had its last expression here after Kirchnerism lost the presidency in 2015 and a right-wing government had a go and failed. Peronism came back in its worst possible form. And the absolute disaster of the last Peronist government, which was with a united Peronism. So you had the entire center left, Communist Party, etc., everyone that's just kind of that progressive part of Peronism, down through the farthest reactionary right wing of the Peronist Party, with a government that was an absolute disaster, which is what opens the door to Milei. Milei comes and it's a frontal attack on all fronts to try to achieve what the bourgeoisie has been trying to achieve, which they call normalization, since 2001 in Argentina. And they have all tried and failed. Milei represents the first serious attempt and actual advances in trying to make daily protests that actually win things, not the norm, to take away benefits that the third of the working class that is registered and unionized in Argentina still has, which are at a European level in terms of labor rights, etc. There has been resistance. The left has played a central role in that, a visible leading role in that resistance. And it's began to mark some limits. The massive mobilizations stopped his education plan. They marked a limit when he, with the Pride March, when he went all out homophobic. And last March 24th was a historic day where, after 20 years of marching divided, there was, for the first time in 20 years, a united march of the human rights organizations in Argentina on the anniversary of the 1976 fascist military coup, and on terms that were independent of the government and all bourgeois forces, with a political platform that was the one that had us all united since the fall of the dictatorship, until Kirchnerism co-opted those mobilizations and divided the human rights organizations. And for example, just this morning, another key struggle has been the retirees that have been confronting repression every Wednesday in front of the Congress, and have become a staple of the moment. And then just this morning, when we're getting the news that an ongoing struggle of the Garrahan Hospital, which is a big public hospital, the main children's hospital in Argentina, has been fighting for a few weeks now. Very, very difficult struggle. The government just caved in and offered a 60% increase that will probably be accepted. So there is a resistance. There is not yet a crisis of the government. He has the backing of the bourgeoisie and the IMF, who's saving his ass basically in these weeks. But that's a general overview. I don't want to get too much into it, because I think I also want to say something about the left as another point, which I understand is what people are interested in discussing. I mean, to understand why Trotskyism is what it is in Argentina, I think there's a couple of things to take in mind. One is the development of the class struggle in Argentina, which has key moments in 1982 and in 2001. 1982, because unlike the rest of the continent, not Chile, Peru, Bolivia, everywhere that we had similar dictatorships in the 70s, Argentina is the only place that it was overthrown by revolutionary mobilization. Everywhere else, the return to democracy was planned from above, controlled by the bourgeoisie and its institutions and its parties. In Argentina is the only place where they did not control it at all. Their plan was to stay in power for a few more years. A massive mobilization overthrew them. And that created well, it was a victory in the class struggle, to put it one way. 2001 was something similar. The entire neoliberal agenda was overthrown by mass mobilization. And its effects are what Milei is still trying to reverse now. I mean, after 2001, it became the norm that every sector in society just understood in consciousness that it was the quite normal thing to do to just go out and block the nearest avenue when you have any kind of problem. They cut your energy. No one thinks to call the energy company to complain. They get together, they meet at the front of the building, and they block the road, and the police has to come and ask. And that was a general situation after 2001. The left was able to take advantage of this because of a couple of things also. One is that the PST, the Trotskyist organization in the 70s, which had debated with the guerrillist left in the 70s, which was the main organizations on the left at that time, was able to survive the dictatorship underground and got to 1982 with a preserved structure of some 500 cadre that had been preserved and passed the test of the dictatorship, and was able to come above ground and build a mass organization of 20,000 members that won over 100 unions, that trained a layer of cadre in revolutionary policies that, despite it breaking apart, like many organizations of the revolutionary left did after the fall of the Soviet Union, left, our organization, the MS, 3 of the 4 parties of the left front come from that organization. We're a part of that mass. And beyond the 3 parties, there's a whole series of union leaders, anti-bureaucratic rank and file union leaders that play a role in many unions, in many movements, in many neighborhoods, that were trained in that experience. It left a legacy that is part of the explanation for why the left is what it is today. And then also 2 kind of success stories of the United Front, you could say. In this case, it was 2 electoral fronts with the Communist Party, one in the 80s, one in the 90s, one with the MAS, another with the MST, both called United Left, Izquierda Unida. One made the Trotskyists become more known. It was through that front that Zamora became a nationally known figure. And both times, what was built through that front, with the program of that front, in the public figures that were the Trotskyists, public figures of that front that became better and better known, all that political capital was left with the Trotskyists when, on both occasions, that front was broken, when the Communist Party went back to its, Peronist coalitions. The last time that happened, 2004, they've never returned. And that's kind of the last part that explains it, is Trotskyists were able to occupy a space on the revolutionary left that Kirchnerism completed the division, because they successfully co-opted and brought into the Peronist coalition every other expression of the center left, reformist left. In the last few elections, there has been no electoral expression on left of the Peronist front other than the left front, which is a front of 4 Trotskyist organizations. Um, what are the limits? Because you have an organization that has, I mean, it's significant that there is a unity of the revolutionary left. In an ideal situation where you occupy the entirety of the space known as the left, that's why in Argentina, anyone talks about the left, they're talking about us. It's not ambiguous. There isn't someone else that is considered the left. Um, it has, anywhere from around 1 million votes as kind of our electoral base. We have a handful of, I think, five national deputies now, a few dozen provincial ones, and city councilors, etc. Significantly, in the last election, we, for the first time, the left got councilors in the city councils of Greater Buenos Aires, which is significant, not on electoral terms, but on what it means, because it is where the highest concentration of the industrial working class and the social base of power of Peronism is based. And so to break in there, because in those areas we had not 4, 5, 6% of the vote, but 10, 15, or a bit more, it means something significant. In the unions as well, the left has, throughout all these years, maintained something. So we have the leadership of a couple of unions, but it's not so much the unions we lead directly, but the level of crisis of Peronism that gives the left a wide audience and repercussions on it in the rank and file and the base of the union movement. I don't want to go. I don't want to go over time, but examples of this. Since Milei took office, the mobilization, the left has imposed on the CGT many times what it has to do. The first general strike was very much conditioned by the left. Their first mobilization was the first time they had to call us to a meeting to discuss, okay, where in the plaza should your column go, ours, etc. You cannot, just don't chant this, general strike thing. We went, placed our column where we wanted. We had the entire plaza chanting general strike, general strike. They had set up a stage that they didn't use because they were not going to say anything to their own public under those conditions. So there is a crisis of Peronism and of the union bureaucracy that the left is in a position to exploit much more than we're doing so. And here's where maybe some of the limitations begin to come in, because the left front has this possibility, it has this audience, but its main limitation is that it is exclusively an electoral front of 4 parties. So it doesn't have a presence as such, because everyone knows the left front. But, 45 million Argentinians know who the left front is. They probably sympathize to some level, etc. But they don't know, MST, PTS, PO, and in the movements, in the labor unions, in everywhere, there isn't a presence of the left front as such. Even politically, except when we're on electoral campaign, there isn't a response. What does the left front say about everything Milei says or does? There isn't that. There isn't a communication, a united communication of the left front towards the mass audience that it has. And this is a huge problem because the opportunity is huge. That's why the MST has a proposal that so far none of the other 3 parties agree with. But if we would open up the front in any way, turn it into a kind of party of parties where each of us can maintain our organizations, but it function as a party where it could become a party of 20,000 members. There are thousands of people. I mean, we probably have 8,000 or 9,000 between us. There is at least double that who would be members, militants of the left front if they had a way to do so, but there are no meetings of the left front. There's no place. The only way to participate in the left front is voting for it when there's elections or joining one of its parties. If we were able to do that and so have a united action on the union movement, on everything, in the class struggle, responding politically to everything, we wouldn't have a base of 5% of the vote. It could be 20% of the vote. And not as an end in of itself, but I always say this, the vote in Argentina, at least for us, it's a revolutionary perspective. I'm not interested in 20% of the vote instead of 5% of the vote because it's so many more parliamentarians. Now, if there's a new 2001 revolutionary crisis, the difference of the mobilized masses seeing us as a viable alternative for power is the difference between if you got in the last election 5 or 20% of the vote. That's where we see a huge opportunity that is being squandered by not wanting this to be more than an electoral front to have more parliamentarians. And I think, how am I doing on time? I didn't want to, but I can just leave it there.
Oh,
See
okay.
what you guys think. Because if not, I think I'm just like, I'm going to talk about, I can branch out into different places, and I'm not sure what you guys are most interested in going farther into. So maybe I'll stop there and you
Okay,
tell me.
thanks. Thanks. That's a very, very interesting opening. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. And of course, we come in and answer questions as they arise, and you get plenty of time to reply also to the discussion at the end. First of all, Norma. Hi, comrade. You have to unmute yourself, Norma.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Federico, and thank you, Roger. I need to leave, so I, I would like just to point out that part of the left who also came elected as representative in, as Federic said, in the city of Buenos Aires, is supporting and has had supported many, if not all, the politics of Kirchnerism. I make a difference between Peronism and Kirchnerism, at least in the last 10 or years of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The problems of Argentina are not only because of the last previous government, which was made by Alberto Fernández. I need to put names here to differentiate, because it's not because just the last government of 4 years and the previous one and all the Cristinism, 2 mandates there, I mean, they said 10 years of governments. And then people now, the reaction to Milei is a reaction to Christianism, which is not Peronism. And I must say, I finish with that Argentina, even if the power concentrated, centralized, as I explained it some weeks or months ago, precisely here, and even if all the power is concentrated in one city, which unfortunately, and even the left voted for that, became autonomous and is a state within the state, all Argentina is not only that city or this city, but a territory which is 70% of Europe, with many different set pseudo-failures and underdevelopment. So we need to put in perspective and to analyze the left, which I completely agree is in the workers, in the trade unions. At the base, it have a very good representative and Trotskyism and a very good delegates, dirigents, and the gap precisely the transition to organization, to union, unification with said the left of other and the left Peronism, and is necessary, and there is a work to do. I mean, I think it's not for just tomorrow, but I mean, surprise, I mean, reality is always more rich than our minds. So thank you very much. I wanted just to put out this comment. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Norma, for coming when you must be very tired from your flight. And thanks for your contribution. Next is Finn from Dublin.
Comrades, I want to thank Federico for a stimulating and interesting opening contribution. I think in a discussion of this nature, we need to remind ourselves of the enormous price that was paid by a generation of activists after the 1976 military coup. Trade unionists, students, intellectuals, activists, political campaigners, murder, kidnap, torture, and of course, the disappearances. I think they're called los desaparecidos. So an enormous price has been paid in the struggle against the military regime of 1976. I think the estimates of victims ranges between 15,000 and 30,000 people. And we should remind ourselves about that in a discussion like this. A second point I want to make is about this word populism. I suppose Peron and his movement is the first time in any meaningful sense that the word populism was used. But Peronism initially, even though Peron himself was part of an earlier military coup, when he became elected president, the populism, as it is described at that time, represented a struggle of the rich against the poor. That's a very simple way to put it, but that's the way the question was posed, and that's the question that was represented. Today, populism, as the term is used, is a reference to the right, the rise of the right. The new populists are, Trump, Le Pen, Orban, and that kind of stuff. But the populism, as it is applied to Peron, was different. And it was, as I said, the rich against the poor in a simplified kind of summary of it. But I want to ask a question about Peronism. Federico has explained the complete failures of the inheritors of Peronism, the people who followed Juan Perón himself as leaders at various times. But nonetheless, is there still a residue of support for the ideas of Juan Perón, like the representation of workers' rights, free education, health, nationalization of industries, all these things that Peronism was involved with initially? Of course, they were reversed under subsequent leaders of the Peronist movement. But my question is there still a residue of support for the ideas of Peronism? And Federico spoke about the Peronist Front and how the Communist Party and other parties try to join up with the, I suppose, left Peronist kind of movement. Does that mean there's still a residue of support? Because why else would these parties be drawn towards it? And it's because Peronism initially represented so many progressive ideas. I mean, I mentioned some, but also housing provision, the rights of trade unionists, women's suffrage, all these issues which were resolved to some extent under Juan Perón, and also when his wife Isabel became leader. Is there still support for these kind of ideas? And if so, how does the left approach these issues in terms of winning people away from Peronist kind of influences? What kind of demands, what kind of policies would be best directed to undermine the continuing influence of Peronism, if it is there? So thank you again, Federico, for a very interesting opening contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Finn. Very, very good question. Comrade, I think I recognize you as Steve. You're next.
Okay, thanks, Roger. And thanks, Federico, for the introduction and the background. I think the present situation that you describe really poses questions that revolutionaries all around the world need to think about very carefully, to learn lessons and to learn about how those lessons might be applied, not only in Argentina, but elsewhere. And in particular, your presentation of the really quite interesting phenomenon of the FITU, the electoral front. As you say, it's got, what, 4 or 5 MPs. It's got representation in a number of provinces and cities. But it only, as I understand it, it only actually exists really when there is an election. The rest of the time, the 4 parties involved, as it were, do their own thing. Now that can be a very well, it obviously is a very successful approach to the possibilities of electioneering. And I'm sure within an election campaign, you all do your very best to promote not just parliamentary politics, but revolutionary politics. But it poses the question, what do the 4 parties do as Argentina's politics unfold, and particularly in the current international situation, the likelihood of quite serious economic crisis within a period of time. At that point, the inability of the 4 organizations to present a clear program, clear organization to go forward will turn into its opposite. It will be a major handicap if you can't all agree on what to argue for and how to organize and what to fight for, what demands to raise. So I wonder, Federico, I mean, how do you see that problem being resolved? I mean, you mentioned in passing that the other 3 parties don't agree with your proposal. Well, that's hardly surprising, perhaps. But how do you take it forward? Does the MST have a strategy for dealing with this? Because in the end, we can't afford to be building something that could become an obstacle in a serious crisis. That's my first question. And also a second question. I mean, everyone, of course, knows that we need to organize the trade unions. But could you tell us something about how the unions are organized in Argentina? Are they organized on a kind of a workplace branch system, or regionally, or geographically, or what? Because obviously that will make a difference to how one intervenes, and it would be interesting to know something of the experience of intervention, particularly if, as you say, you have the leadership of a couple of unions now. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve. Again, very pertinent questions. The next, I'm going to call in Ian and then Eric. Ian?
Hi, thanks. Fascinating contribution and contributions from the floor already. Just want to ask a couple of questions first, Federico. The idea of contending for power, I think in a situation where Milei's in power and was actually more fringe than the FITU until the last election. His party, I think it's newer, had less representatives, correct me if I'm wrong, until 1 or 2 elections ago. Is the possibility of us, the seesaw of Argentine politics, as it were, could go your way too, even without, but especially with another kind of 2001 uprising? I mean electorally as well, or obviously did Milei have things that our side could never hope to have in terms of elite backing, and was that what made all the difference? I did see Macri, who was seen as a less right-wing, less extreme neoliberal president that one I remember as being pretty bad when I was in the Argentina Solidarity campaign 5 or 10 years ago against him. He threw his weight behind Milei in the second round after having a pretty extreme right-wing candidate of his own in the first, who now works in Milei's government. Is there any possibility, this is coming from a second question, of that kind of cooperation with elements of the left in the Peronist bloc? I think the Peronist slates have been put up for president the last few times, especially at the last election, have been tilted in terms of the presidency, very much, you could say, the moderate side of things. But Kirchnerism itself, I think, is quite different. I think actually, when Finn was talking about Peron being most left populist and then his successors moving more towards the right, that's certainly true with the likes of Menem. But I'd say that Kirchnerism was well to the left of traditional Peronism, came out of the struggles of the 1970s, and its top leadership and its impetus came out of 2001. Compare it to Corbynism within the Labour Party, for example, or Bernie Sanders in the Democrats. And what's interesting is that since the electoral defeat in 2023, Christina Kirchner's actually come back to be the leader of the National Peronist Party. So that seems like it could be another move to the left there. Though there's obviously wheels within wheels of strange alliances and strange fallings out. To see there's quite a falling out right now in Buenos Aires between Kirchner and Axel Kicillof, who is seen as a protege. But that might be partly explained by the fact he didn't want to run for president last time, and he had a probably better chance of winning than the extremely right-wing candidate that was put up and predictably lost as the incumbent economy minister in a period of hyperinflation. So, yeah, is there any way of, as a tactical issue, first of all, working with the Peronists? I know the Communist Party experience might be an argument against, but I think it's certainly something that should be at least seen as a possibility, that it would be very preferable to Milei winning a second term, for example, if you don't think there's a chance of winning yourself or even in the second round. But also, as a more point of principle, I think the crisis of Peronism isn't just mistakes that they've made, but the lawfare against Christina Kirchner, her not being allowed to stand, the whole media complex of turning everything into a question of her supposedly, but not really, but the media discourse of her exceptional corruption, which is like the media discourse of Jeremy Corbyn over here being anti-Semitic. And I think it was a point of principle to stand up against those ruling class lies. So I wonder what you think of that too, as a kind of question, whatever the organisational form, solidarity to comrades under fire from the right in that way.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Now, Eric, who, as I said before, who is a recent visitor to Argentina. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Federico. And the other comrades on the call have already formulated quite probably better than I could have some of the things I wanted to raise to hear what you had to say about it. So I won't repeat them. I guess I'm struggling a bit with a different question, and that has to do with when I was there, I didn't see any evidence of this really, and in fact, many of you weren't on that other call. I was so impressed. The people I met, the first thing they would ask me is, "Are you a militant? Are you a Trotskyist?" My Spanish is terrible. They could hear that I was foreign, but it really is those of you that don't know, have never been. It really is the dominant current in the left, and it's just obvious that that's true. And I was really impressed with that. However, given the current kind of big power conflict between the Chinese bureaucracy and American imperialism, I've wondered if there might not be kind of a resurgence in Argentina and other countries, other what are often called "quote unquote" developing countries, um, toward a kind of the old Maoist ideas about a progressive bourgeois, and maybe the Brazilians and the Chinese will rescue us against all this debt and all that kind of thing. That was one question, and maybe another question that you might not want to get into, but I really was interested in retrospect. We had a conversation a couple months ago, you and I, and there seemed to be kind of an indication that your organization was building some links in the US. And that might be a real breath of fresh air. I mean, Democratic Socialists of America, our social democratic hot mess of a formulation up here, it's trying to go 10 different directions at once. And, some orthodox Marxism would be really, some other people to unite with would be really refreshing right about now. So I wonder if you can, or if it's appropriate, or if it doesn't take things completely off course. I'd like to know how your link building with other activists up here is going in the US. Okay, thank you so much, comrade.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Steve Zeltzer, you're next.
Yeah, I think that the importance of Argentina is significant. It is the largest Trotskyist working class formation in the world. And I think that in itself is a development. I think that, though, there's some serious questions of where it's going, because in this period internationally, with the decline of U.S. imperialism, the inter-imperialist rivalries going on, and towards World War and Depression, what do Trotskyists and revolutionaries internationally do? It's not just a question in Argentina. What I think we have to discuss is how we can build united fronts with Trotskyists and other organizations around class issues. Where does your organization stand on that? One of the things we know in the United States, and it's true in other countries, sectarianism. The left parties, even the Trotskyist parties, are very sectarian. Many of the Trotskyist parties call for a labor party, but don't want to build a united front for a labor party. I think you've overcome that electorally in Argentina, but the fact of the matter is the international Trotskyist left formations are not linking up internationally around united front campaigns. What is your organization in Argentina going to do towards that development? We know in the United States the left party calls for a labor party, but it doesn't work with any other left groups for a labor party. So again, the question of what you say and what you do is a very important question. The other thing is, you say that you want a united left party, or you want these formations to form in a united left party. But I have a question. I understand, a May Day rally in Argentina, and the Workers' Party tried to get all the groups in the left united front together to have a joint action. They weren't able to do that. Why was that? Why couldn't they have a united left working class May Day in Argentina? That's a question. The other question is the unions. The unions internationally, there is no working class struggle wing. There's a World Federation of Trade Unions. What is your organization doing towards development of a working class international trade union formation, confronting not only the WFTU, but also ICFTU, the pro-capitalist trade union federation? What's your orientation towards that? There is going to be a conference in Naples on the 14th against imperialism, uniting against repression. And I think one of the things that we've tried in the United States to have is a defense against the attack on Trotskyist organizations, PO and others. We need a united front to defend comrades, left and unions in Argentina. What is your organization doing on an international level for that kind of action that can unite the Trotskyists and the working class movement internationally? So I see that perspective of the united front of Trotskyists and working class around class issues as critical. And what's your perspective? What's your organization doing internationally in relationship to that? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Steve. Since there's no hands up, I think at this point it might be an idea to invite Federico to come back and answer some of those questions. There's absolutely plenty to answer there. And I'm sure that will stimulate more discussion and more questions after. So, Federico?
Sure. Yeah, there's a bunch here, no? I mean, I guess a lot of people went into Peronism, Kirchnerism. Um, Peronism is a bourgeois party, right? To begin with, it's not a labor party. It's a bourgeois party that built its base in the working class in the 1940s. After that, in the 70s, it split in, it was a big tent and split into opposing wings where often the most violent confrontation throughout the 70s leading up to the coup was between the two wings of Peronism, which had a left wing with Montoneros and the JP that thought they were fighting for the socialist homeland, and it had a fascist trade union wing as well, openly fascist, which built the AAA gangs that put bombs in our party offices and killed our comrades before in the years before the coup, and were the basis on which the military then built its apparatus of of the so-called dirty war that disappeared up to 30,000 people and liquidated a significant part of the vanguard of a whole generation. Um, that's Peronism. Peronism is neoliberalism in the 90s. Peronism and Kirchnerism, I mean, Nestor and Christina Kirchner were not progressive before 2001. They were, Kirchner was the governor of Santa Cruz, which is an oil producing province. He was diehard Menemist in made his mark with the privatization of the national oil company. He is the one who best read what happened in 2001 and what was happening in the region, and took on a progressive what do you call it, facade or discourse in a situation in which much of what is attributed to Kirchnerism were actually concessions won by the class struggle and the rebellion of 2001. They had to concede things to be able to rule. Kirchner was always said, okay, yeah, we have, this is the only way we're going to, I mean, 5 presidents walked in and flew out of power in the course of a week. This is how Kirchnerism got to power. And for a period, for the whole period of Kirchnerism, Peronism was split. That's why Kirchnerism was able to co-opt a significant part of the radicalized left of 2001. I think it was the decade when anti-party, horizontalism, Zapatism, and all these things were popular. And so Kirchnerism was able to feed on that and and capitalize on that and co-opt it. Also helps to have, you know, state power and money to do so, which we didn't have. But they did co-opt part of that. And electorally, what it also helped them that Peronism, the right wing of Peronism, presented their own candidates. So every election you had Kirchnerism as a distinct expression and a right-wing Peronist expression, which helped divide the votes of the right and maintain Kirchnerism's image as something that is to the left of things. After Macri, that disappeared. Peronism is united again. It's one thing. So it's gone. There's no more progressive left-wing Kirchnerism and right-wing Peronism. It's all together. And that's why their candidates have been Scioli, then Massa, then Alberto, and then Massa. Increasingly right-wing, farther right-wing expressions of Peronism, all united now. For the present and the future, Cristina's coming back on board, but it's not bringing things. It doesn't represent any shift to the left. On the contrary, she has shifted extremely to the right. And that has a lot to do with the problems they're having. As far as We have had many policies. I mean, in electoral fronts, even with sectors that come from Peronism, united fronts with sectors that come from Peronism, but not with the Peronist Party, which is a bourgeois party. Pino Solanas in 2011 was a left-wing Peronist who, at that time, representing this. Someone asked about the ideas of Peronism, of Kirchnerism, the famous three banners of Peronism, which is a political sovereignty, economic independence, and social justice. Yeah, we take these banners up and explain that no Peronist organization is defending them anymore. That the people, that the governments, Peronist governments have been the ones who have gone against these causes time and again. Pino Solanas was one expression. They're exceptional because there isn't. I mean, it's a political organization that has shifted right wing to the right, and it's bourgeois in nature. When there are those exceptions, we're not sectarian about them because it does bring their base closer. For example, and we talk about the problems we can have now with the FITU as well. Last March 24th, going into like what Mac asked us as well, you know, what do? We see a way forward because what he says is exactly the problem. You know, now building our own organization, the FITU is also a great conquest. We wouldn't have, the left wouldn't be what it is, and we wouldn't have the opportunities we have to squander them or not if we didn't have the FITU. So it's not an obstacle yet, that there isn't something, we wouldn't be better off on our own now. But for example, this last March 24th, I said there was finally all the human rights organizations united again, and it was because half of them are Peronist, but they broke from having their Peronist march, which had on stage a defense of Peronist governments, Peronist bourgeois politicians, etc., and broke from that and came to a march where it's the human rights organizations that come to a stage that is with their human rights organizations leaders and ours of the left, and an agreed program that defends none of the bourgeois expressions or politicians or governments or local governments that attacks the policies that go against human rights that Peronist governments have carried out. And when there was a divided marches, they would refuse to denounce them. The photo, it was national news that there was finally a united march on March 24th. And the image of that unity was the historic banner of the Peronist mothers of Plaza de Mayo and the MST column, which is great for us. It looks great. The problem is it wasn't the FITU, because the other three parties did not go. The other three parties maintained a policy of trying to maintain a divided march. Failed utterly because there was just no margin for it. They ended up kind of being part of the march, but not. That's a problem. Now, how did we do that? Coordinating with dozens of organizations, most of which vote for the FITU, support the FITU, but they can't participate in the FITU unless we advance in what we're doing. So is that the beginnings of a possible plan B if the FITU falls through? Is organizations that come from Peronism but can break from the bourgeois Peronist party, like the human rights organizations that were represented there and political expressions, that could be part of an alternative? Yeah, we're open to those things. They're not on the table now. We don't see every Peronist, I mean, these elections this year, every Peronist organization and kind of center-left organization, the Communist Party, etc., is going to be part of the same front with all of Peronism. That's not on the table today. When something breaks from that towards a politics that are correct, we're not sectarian about it. And it's certainly part of, what could be in the future. The problem now is the left has this possibility. That's what we're fighting for now, and that's what we're going to fight for until something else opens up, at least. What else? There's not much margin for China, Brazil. No one's even. At least it doesn't have any ideological weight in any sector below. I mean, yeah, there's Milei is we're one of those countries that has always been Kirchner's went a long way in moving towards China. Milei wants to go back to the U.S., but there's a lot of ties. But none of that leads to any Maoist resurgence or anything along those lines. There's no margin for any progressive bourgeoisie. And what else? What am I missing? The unions. The unions here. There's two federations. One's the historic CGT that has most of the industrial unions, about 3 million members. The CTA, which is a split from that in the 90s. It was a progressive split politically, split in the 90s against the CGT support of neoliberalism and the deregulation and privatizations and everything, is mainly the state workers union and the teachers unions and some industrial unions. The tire workers unions that the left leads is in the CTA, for example. They have national leaderships that are very hard to contest, especially the industrial ones. It's easier to have a president of the country elected than to be able to present candidates in some of these unions in their national elections. And then there is a workplace representation where each place has a local leadership of the union that is voted in the workplace, which is where we have obviously the most weight. What are we doing there? We have a kind of coordination of all the left-led unions, which go beyond what FITU members, left front members, lead. It is quite broader than that. But it doesn't work on a regular basis. There is some coordination. The main success of this has been, especially since Milei has been elected, to be able to have in every march, in every general strike, there has been an independent column led by this coordination to differentiate itself, and which is clearly led by the FITU part of this, but it's much broader. There is a distinct, visible, independent sector of the trade union movement that has its own column with its own declaration, that participates as such in the mobilizations of the CGT in the 3 general strikes, in their mobilization on December 27th. Not so on May 1st, when the CGT had basically a rally in support of bourgeois politicians, and so the rank and file left-wing sector of the union movement did not go support that. We had a separate organization. That's the one time since Milei's been in trouble where the left has not expressed itself at the mobilization of the CGT. I don't know if I'm missing anything, but Eric, on the US, I mean, write me. Yeah, we're gonna have an open meeting on July 5th in Chicago during the socialism conference with other people. We're discussing a recruitment project to launch a revolution organization in the US.
Okay, thanks, Federico. There's still plenty of time if comrades want to come back. For instance, Ian, you put some points in the chat. Why not actually, make them orally now? And anybody else who wants to come in with any further questions or points of discussion, there is still time.
That would be good. Thanks, Roger. I'll just go up the chat to see. I was just about to type something else new as well. These ones were a bit belated. I put them at the time when you were talking about Kirchner, but originally they just went to Roger. I was going to say as well, good to hear about your party's non-sectarian and effective intervention on the same march as the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo. It's a bit worrying to hear about the other parties' much less effective march separately. Line though, that kind of shell is something I think we have to get out of if we're to, or effectively hegemonize, organize the whole society against Milei. Just replying to a few of the things on Kirchner briefly. He did come out of the 1970s struggle. He and Christina both were militants of the left-wing Peronist youth. The fact that they survived, the ambiguities, the caution around that being part of a minority of the survivors of the fascist massacre, no doubt they were more cautious, more contradictory in office in the 80s and 90s than before 2001. But it's almost like they still had that politics and like a rabbit out of a hat in 2001, as well as with all the pressures that we might expect actually fully bourgeois politicians to have to concede to, but it might have played into him being the one who understood it best. And while he was a Menem compliant governor in the 90s, I believe Christina was a very oppositional, like Jeremy Corbyn, again, Diane Abbott, George Galloway style oppositional within the party congressperson at the exact same time. So I think there was always a leftism there. In terms of it being a bourgeois party, I agree. I think your history of it, of the disaster in the 70s, where the right of Peronism actually led to the dirty war with fascists in the trade union movement itself, was correct. I think some of those very right-wing sectors in the trade unions were still there in Christina's own presidency, and sometimes leading strikes in cooperation with the capitalists almost against her, if I remember right. Certainly seemed more combative at times against her than against Macri. But it's a bourgeois party, but so are the US Democrats, and the US Democrats are even an imperialist bourgeois party, of course. But the Bernie movement within them was a good step forward. It would have been a better step forward if he'd actually won, obviously, and if he organizationally broke at a certain time. As you said about the Kirchners, actually both things happened with them. Not only did they win, but there was the break between them and right-wing Peronist candidates throughout the time that they were actually in power. So again, it's not to say it's not a bourgeois party, the Peronist party, but there's a kind of positive aspect of Kirchnerism specifically within that. And also, I'm not convinced if Christina's moved to the right from reading what she says about Milei. She seems to be roasting him from a pretty hard, combative left perspective that the Democrats, for example, even people like Bernie, only occasionally get it quite right with Trump because of the added complication of imperialism, perhaps, and the fact that he's no worse, to say the least, on Ukraine than the Biden lot. But anyway, I'd also like to say, you asked if you'd forgotten anything. So as well as those other points I'd made in the chat, if you could say more about the witch hunt against Christina, because even if we don't agree with each other entirely about how to assess her, and even if we don't agree with all of her record, I think it's a point of principle to defend someone who's under that amount of witch hunt from the right and the ruling class. Like, she's been banned from standing for office. The media have made everything about her corruption as if there's no other corruption, as if it was exceptional. And she was almost assassinated outside of her one of these trials that were going on. And because the media had whipped up such a level of hatred, the fact that she was almost murdered didn't even seem to move the dial in a way that Bolsonaro getting stabbed might have been one of the things that brought him to power. So, yeah, just a question of solidarity with Christina, whether or not you agree with some of these more positive assessments, but the whole issue of Kirchnerism as a kind of Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn movement as well.
All right, thanks, Ian. Steve and then Norma.
Yes.
Well, Norma, are you in a hurry to leave?
Yeah,
Let's have
would
Norma
like
first.
to. I would like precisely to make a point on this. So thank Jan for having introduced the point, because I would like to make, as I have made here, a very contradictory point to that, and mentioning only one word which have not mentioned till now in this session, which is corruption. And the problem of Argentina political governments, in particular Peronism, but mainly, and with capital letters mainly, Christianism, Kirchnerism and Christianism for two decades, 20 years, say. So it's not a lawfare, it's not an action of the media. And I invite Young to come to Argentina and to see what people, the popular people, even the Peronists, even those who were Kirchnerists, saying about corruption. If Milei is here now, one of the motive for that was the big against corruption, and the big corruption represented particularly by the Kirchnerism and Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. It's not a lawfare, and we need to respect the fact, the reality. So it's a big question, and one of the causes which made Argentina today trying to liberate from that with an opposite side. I mean, so a left need to incorporate this, but I mean, some of the left, as Frederick explained very well, in Argentina, you are told, I mean, everybody's told who are at the left, not means about the different labels of the representative of the left. So this is a big problem, one which need to be solved. And please, Young, and invite you to come to Argentina. And then this said positive or idealistic image you have about the solidarity. Of course, solidarity with the people who have suffered, and they are suffering still. And I finish with that. This is for Federico, sorry. Left, and in particular left Peronism, because we need to understand what is transversality in social, in generations, in trade unions. And left Peronism had also a theorist, a brilliant theorist, died, and John William Cook, which who you would know, I mean, was a brilliant, was a resistant, was a persecuted, and made books who inspired the 70s, in which, I mean, left Peronism come to the power with a government, with a president. Just before, in the 73, came Peron, and then it was said less than 1 year or I mean, a short period in which brilliant people could have, I mean, could have made a work. Then after came Peron died, military crisis, and so on. So Kirchnerism, I mean, I'm just to say, trying to understand, Peronism have been programmed, died from the 50s, in which was the military who was proclaimed, died cyclically in Argentina, and even with very bad dirigence from inside, as Federico explained very clear. But the basis, the popular basis of Peronism, in particular, Eva Peron, Evita, and so on, made that this recreated, and in the 70s, as I said, came to the government too much, then filed. So the fact of the best way to help people, to help left, to help parties, to help whatever the levels of Trotsky's parties you would like to make, is not made solidarity with Argentina. If Argentina was isolated internationally by this Kirchnerism, and there are the proof, two times condemned with all the proof. I mean, there is no appeal. So the best way to make a contribution for Argentina is not adherated to Fernández de Kirchner, which is now falling, I mean, in some sense. Thank you very much. I need to leave. Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. Thank you very much. Steve.
Right, follow that. We've already established that Argentina is one of the few countries where the left is sort of automatically Trotskyists of one sort or another. But that means that what happens in Argentina as the struggle unfolds is going to have considerable significance in the other countries, particularly of Latin America, where the left is also not unheard of. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of the development, is the international ramifications. In the same way as the bourgeoisie looks with great interest at what Milei is doing, the left internationally will look with great interest at what you're doing and what the left is doing as class struggle unfolds. And I wonder if you could say something about the left in the rest of Latin America, your own organization, other organizations, because that will play an important role as crisis unfolds. Undoubtedly, international solidarity will be important. And perhaps you could tell us something about that.
All right, are there any other comrades who've got any contribution to make or any questions?
Just
Well,
a random other question about the role of Pope Francis and relations with him, seen as like a left-wing pope. He had quite a rocky relationship with Christina until he became pope, but then mended fences. And while that looked like could well be a political lash up, he actually had a much worse relationship with all succeeding presidents, including Milei, who I think called him a communist nutter, and a frosty relationship with the likes of Macri. So I saw one article saying that him being Pope while Argentina elects Milei was like the other way around, would have been Poland electing a neo-Joseph Stalin figure, rather than the right-wing priest-ridden Solidarity party during the papacy of John Paul II. So this kind, and he never went back home, of course. So this kind of separation between what's happened in Argentina and Argentina's most famous gift to the world, so to speak, in recent times, and also all the questions about his past, of course, as well. But what kind of effect has that had on the ground? As I say, I was worried when he first got in that he could have been like a John Paul figure to try and roll back the red tide, the way John Paul helped with what happened in, obviously, Poland, but across Eastern Europe in general. In the end, he seemed to be almost the last man standing for the red tide at certain points. So just what you think of that? I know it's a bit off beam, but I think it is in some ways part of the left, or something that left-wing people will orient to. And the contrast between him and Milei is pretty big.
Right. Any more? I think, Federico, I think that we should now end the discussion. You sum up, answer any further questions, and make any final points. Your floor is yours.
Sure, thanks. I'd argue about latest Argentinian gift being the Pope or Messi, for example, but he was certainly Bergoglio. We knew him very well. He was certainly never played on the left in Argentina. He was also not the conservative right wing of the Catholic Church. He was very much a center political figure in the church in Argentina, and did have a lot of the kind of social work with the poor and stuff that the church tends to do. But he was never left wing. He clashed with Cristina from the right, for example. He was certainly within the world, more international politics of the Vatican, a conscious attempt of washing the church's face a bit from Ratzinger and the flurry of abuse and stuff that in recent years had kind of tainted incredibly more that institution. So that was a conscious policy that they adopted, and he was the figurehead of that. Here in Argentina, the only expression is a curious figure that is on the left of the Peronist front, very linked to him, who's Grabois, but he is so erratic that he can be so left-wing one day and the next day say we're gonna, firing squad to teachers who go on strike, in literal words in an interview. About Kirchnerism, I know it's from the outside you get one side of it, which is the discourse, but there's much more, especially when you live through it. It's you see all of it. Starting from their origins, they were never left wing. They were Peronist militants, both of them. Now, during the dictatorship, they were not politically active. During the dictatorship, they made their first $1 million as real estate lawyers, in part helping sell houses of disappeared people, which is to put things into context. So that's not, it's not, oh, there's doubts because they survived. They did not play any role against the dictatorship. They did not play any progressive role in the 80s. They played a nefarious role in the 90s, and they became progressives after 2001. And the fact is that since 2013, they have been moving to the right. That's why, Macri comes to office because Cristina started moving her politics to the right and beginning to apply austerity. this was seen in how she confronted that election. She put as her successor one of the most right-wing candidates Peronism could have, which was Scioli at the time. Scioli had been Menem's vice president and governor, I think, of Buenos Aires. Come 4 years later, and their new united candidate is another right-wing figure who became president and did all the disasters we know. Come 4 years later, it's a candidate farther to the right, which is Massa. He is literally a man of the U.S. Embassy, openly, pro-IMF. And Cristina defends this. Today, obviously, she's going to attack Milei, but I mean, today she's talking about the necessity of a responsible, efficient state. She attacks Milei, but inches closer to his discourse and his policies. So that's and this isn't. I mean, this is why there won't be a resurgence of a left expression of the Peronist Party. On the contrary, and that's why there is the opportunity. There is a bit farther to the left. There are Peronist sectors that could break off in this direction. Precisely because Kirchnerism is more and more diluted with its principal figure shifting more to the right. There could be rank and file groups, social groups, etc., that break off from Peronism and come this way. We are recruiting militants, comrades now that come from Peronism like we have never really before. It's the kind of thing you always want to do, and it's always there. And now there is not an isolated, exceptional event, but in many places where we are recruiting people that come themselves saying, yes, the banners of Peronism, it's not Peronism. The left has always been there. It's with the left. You know, I've always argued against it. Now I'm convinced. There is that opening today, but it's not with any part of Peronism or Kirchnerism that is moving to the right and diluting within a more right-wing Peronist coalition. It's to the left of that. And that's where our opportunity and problems become so important, because the opportunity is huge. Because of this crisis of Peronism, the opportunity is so huge. The problem is our associates don't see that opportunity. They're much more skeptical, and so they're arguing about Gramsci and war of positions. And so, what we need to do is just have more deputies, and that's a problem. What are we trying to do? To be the most visible and growing part of the left front that is proposing these things that we need to do, and in the process working with the people that we would want working with the FITU, and see how things go. Internationally, we're seeing it's all tainted by the same situation worldwide. I mean, the highlights of Latin America is very struck by the kind of fallback of the pink tide. So you have in Venezuela a total defeat and a reactionary Bonapartist Maduro regime that our organization, which played a significant role in the 2000s, it was absolutely decimated by Maduro, and we are rebuilding from the bottom up. Ironically, in a broad coalition, more of a platform, united front platform with the Communist Party, who had stuck with Maduro all the way through until they kicked their asses out, actually hijacked their party. Brazil is the other place where we have the PSOL, which is one of the first expressions and longest lasting of broad left parties. We're founding members of it. It's a split from the Workers' Party of Lula, right from when Lula took office and, betrayed the program, basically, from his first measure against retirees that got a whole sector of that broke off and founded the PSOL. Now the PSOL is in a it's at a crossroads. The PSOL its leadership has been won by its more right-wing sector that is about to more openly and clearly join the Lula government, which is the Lula Alquim government, which has even some Bolsonarist sectors in it. So it's one of the things we're discussing now that we have to discuss in the ISL Congress at the end of this year. What are we going to do in Brazil? Because the PSOL is at this point. Everywhere else, there's been processes, but as far as construction of revolutionary organizations, we have small groups. I mean, Brazil with a party of a few hundreds, rebuilding in Venezuela, and then small revolutionary organizations in Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, and just about every country, but nothing of the significance that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you very much, Federico. Very enlightening. I'd like to say that
Sorry.
Oh, go on.
I don't want to seem that I wanted to ignore it, but I'm actually just forgetting it because it was raised a couple of times on Christina and lawfare and stuff. I mean, we're not going to defend her. There was corruption, but we do not trust this system to persecute her or anyone. So we also, do not support the actions, the legal actions against her. Just to clarify.
Okay. Right, thanks, Comrade. I like to say, I think it's been a very lively and well-informed discussion, and I wanted to invite you, Federico, to come to future meetings. As you can see, we have a very open discussions. We have comrades here today from 6 countries. Usually it's actually more than that, but stretching from California in the west to Kanpur in the east. And you're very welcome to participate, you and any of your comrades. The meeting next week, I should say, it still has to be confirmed, but it's 90% sure that we'll be able to have a Palestinian socialist speaking about the whole history of the Palestine movement, and the political outlook, not only in relation to the current struggle in Gaza, but the whole history of the orientation of the Palestinian struggle and so on. It still has to be confirmed, as I say, but we hope very much that comrade will be able to speak next week. You'll be informed, of course, on the mailing list within a couple of days. All right, thank you, comrades. There's no more announcements. Bye, comrades. Thanks for a very, very good discussion.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye, guys. Thanks.